useful skill. Lastly, should you do Olympic weightlifting to benefit your strength and conditioning for a sport? This is something I go back and forth on. When I was studying for my degree in strength and conditioning at university, the way that the course was delivered was as if I was going to be teaching Olympic weightlifting to everyone I saw every day of the week, non-stop. But the reality of most athletes I work with today is that you have a limited amount of time to deliver the best stimulus possible for either strength, speed, or power, whatever it is you're training in that individual at that time. You tend to be working against time constraints, both in terms of the length of the session that you have and the amount of time they have for their next event. So you need to deliver results in a timely fashion, and it may not be the best use of your time to spend 6 to 12 weeks getting someone to be proficient in Olympic weightlifting in the first place before they can really maximize what they do, as in how much weight they're put on the bar and how well they can execute those lifts. That's not actually to say that I am against Olympic weightlifting for athletes. I have taught Olympic weightlifting to athletes in the past. It just sometimes makes it a little bit harder to justify when you know you have limited time with a client, you're designing their program, when you're asking yourself, should I do some jumps, some ballistic weighted movements, some throwing, or should I spend a long chunk of time getting them good enough to do a good clean pull or a hang snatch or something like that? It's certainly not impossible. It's certainly doable to get someone to a fairly decent standard of Olympic weightlifting in a moderate amount of time, but it does sometimes make it harder to justify when you know there are other exercises out there that might deliver similar results. If I'm training a client who likes to do a sport, they don't have anything major coming up, maybe they're training recreationally and they only train with me to set some PBs, or maybe it's a long while off before they're going to compete in something again, and they specifically ask me to teach them some Olympic weightlifting, then chances are I'll teach them some Olympic weightlifting. Like I say, if there are some higher stakes involved, like some time constraints or an event coming up, I might not do it at that time. It's more of a long-term investment, and I do think it's very valuable in that role. The other time that I will consider teaching Olympic weightlifting to my clients is when they already are very good at other movements such as squatting, deadlifting, all those other things, because it forms a good foundation for some of the movements that are to come. Aside from a good squat and a good deadlift, some of the other important abilities that I will look out for in clients before deciding whether to teach them Olympic weightlifting is that they have good overhead mobility and they are comfortable with their front rack position for a front squat as well. Those are really the 4 boxes that I feel need to be ticked before you start throwing someone in some Olympic weightlifting. Even with those points, there are still variations you could do to get around some of those points, but I'm talking about if you want someone to fully learn the Olympic lifts. The benefits of Olympic weightlifting to sporting performance are very well researched, and it's a movement that you can load up significantly while still producing a good amount of speed and explosive intent. One aspect of Olympic weightlifting that makes it quite unique in strength and conditioning is the idea that you have to hoist the weight as high as you can, as fast as you can, and then you have to drop under that weight and catch it normally in the bottom of a squat or a split stance for a jerk. And once you catch that weight, you have to be fully engaged, fully rigid, so that weight doesn't just fall on you and bury you. There's quite a unique pattern in Olympic weightlifting of contracting really hard to produce that movement, relaxing slightly to pull yourself under the bar, and then contracting again, getting really engaged again to catch that weight. So in very subjective, very broad terms, this idea of like robustness and catching a weight and being rigid and this kind of on again, off again, on again in terms of your contractions, those are all not particularly sport scientific terms, but I do think there are some skills there that Olympic weightlifting brings to the table that are worthwhile doing if you are training in the long term, you're thinking about your long-term development and you're really prepared to stick at it. It could be a good addition for your strength and conditioning.